Welcome to the Natural Health Podcast, where we bring awareness of sustainable health in the business hustle space. The Natural Health Podcast is perfect for the high-performing, business-minded individuals who want to work with their biochemistry to achieve optimal health. It's Friday, which means it's time for friends sharing facts about health, business, and overall success. In today's episode, we talk to Amie Skilton, who will talk about electromagnetic field exposure in your workplace and how you are able to shield yourself from it. Amie Skilton is a naturopath, herbalist and nutritionist, and has been in clinical practice for over 18 years. Clinician, author, formulator, and leading industry educator, she has a special interest in several areas of integrative health, including women's health and hormones, natural fertility, and chronic skin conditions. However, after developing CIRS in 2017, is now studying building biology and is particularly passionate about raising awareness of environmental influences, including mould and EMFs on health. In her spare time, when she has some and she's not nerding out on health research, she's making jewelry and is currently obsessed with all things interior design. Welcome to the Natural Health Podcast, Amie.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
You're most welcome. So currently obsessed with interior design. Why is that?
Well, that's because I've been house hunting for about 6 months and was hoping to buy a property. Still haven't found the one yet, but it's so fun just to imagine doing up your own home and decorating it the way that you want. And I've gotten a little bit carried away in recent months. Let's just put it that way.
I love it. I love it. So you've currently moved, is that right?
Yes, so we have just moved we're still within New South Wales, but we bounced out of Sydney almost up to the Queensland border into Kingscliff. So currently living in a beautiful, semi-sleepy beachside town and very lucky. Currently, time of the recording, we're in the middle of COVID o'clock, which means, we've got some restrictions here in Australia about where we can go. But the postcode here, fortunately, is part of the Queensland border bubble. So in many ways, it doesn't feel like there are restrictions because we can go back and forth, and certainly in loving the extra sunshine, that's for sure.
Oh, I can just imagine. It's actually freezing cold here in Melbourne. Literally, I went for a walk this morning. It was like 7 degrees.
Oh, ouch. You're a brave woman.
had my jumper, my jacket on, everything, but it has to be done. You got to walk. You got to keep moving.
Yes, you do.
Wonderful, wonderful. So from your introduction, I mean, you've had so many years experience in clinic. You're a herbalist, nutritionist, naturopath. You've had some health issues. Wow, there's so much happening. What I wanted to know and to inform the audience is, what have been the key turning points to get you to where you are now, where Amie is here now today?
Yes, well, there's been many, but I suppose the most relevant and recent one is what happened in 2017. So at that point I was, 16 years, a bit over in clinical practice. I'd been mainly focused on chronic skin disorders, especially acne, all things lady business, I like to say, actually. So great skin, great hormones, great fertility, or helping women avoid conception naturally if that's what they want to. And I was sort of humming along and took actually from work to create my own skincare range, write a book, create a clear skin coaching program, and really get the word out for all humans actually about the ultimate cause of acne so that people could heal it properly from the inside once and for all. And unfortunately, what happened at the same time was I moved house and moved into a place that had a water leak that we couldn't see or smell. And it was then that I experienced, really for the first time in my life, very significant deterioration in my health. In fact, that's quite an understatement, actually, when you look at what happened to me. And I almost lost my life. I almost lost my mind. The health that I had enjoyed for 37 years of my life at that point went right down the toilet. And that would be a terrifying experience for anyone. But as a health professional, when you know what you know, but no one knows what's happening to you or how to stop it, it truly shook me to the core. and prompted, I suppose, what will go down as one of the biggest pivots of my life. And what I realized then was no amount of eating well, sleeping well, taking all the right supplements, doing all the right things can help you if there is an environmental toxin that's poisoning you. And that is quite a broad category of things. There's an awful lot of things that can make you unwell. And it was quite a shock to me because as a naturopath, our training is very specific around finding the cause of the problem and dealing with it. And sometimes that's harder than it sounds, but usually you can get to the bottom of it. But for me, I realized there was a real gap in our education as far as environmental toxins went, particularly as it pertains to mold. I think things like chemicals in food and personal care and house cleaning products, people are a bit more savvy. EMFs, I think people have an inkling that that's not good. That's tricky also though, because it's not visible. And certainly in the case of the mycotoxins that wreaked havoc in my body, they're not visible to the naked eye either. And so I clawed my way out of that. And I suppose I'm still trying to get back to full health, although I would say I'm like 85%, 90% now, which is pretty good. And what I did once I was well enough was I started studying building biology. And it started off actually as training as a mold testing technician so that I could actually assess properties for water damage and not end up in a moldy home again. But of course, once you learn life-changing things, you can't unlearn them. And it was really the veil lifted on the source of our home and the built environment as a root cause of ill health and disease. And, you know, for me, part of what I do in this profession is practitioner education. And I just felt so called to continue the training because I want to fill in the gaps for health practitioners. You know, we're caring for people, but we don't go into their homes. They come to ours or our offices or see us online. And the kind of questions we need to be asking our patients as to what's going on in their immediate environment is not something that we're taught in college. And so I'm looking to get that changed one step at a time. But it really has meant that I've moved in a different direction. So I still care about women's health. I still deeply feel distressed for people who suffer from acne because it's just not necessary. But there are many practitioners now who are doing the same kind of work that I was in that space. In the building biology space, there's only a couple of us. And I think for me, having been involved in practitioner, you know, postgrad education for 15 years, I feel like I'm the perfect person to bridge the gap. So here I am.
Wow, what a story. And I think, yeah, your education, your experience, your knowledge is going to give so much to practitioners like myself and others. So I value that so much. And I think I'm talking on behalf of others too. It's absolutely brilliant what you're doing. But to experience all that yourself, what actually happened? What did you experience? Because a lot of people might be like, what are microtoxins? What does that sound like? Because they may be experiencing that.
Yes. So, well, a lot of people are unfortunately living or working in water damaged buildings and don't know, because I think most people, when they think about mold, they sort of imagine a big black patch of something on a wall or a ceiling or something, you know, really obvious like that. But it's only visible to the naked eye when things get really bad, or if water intrusion has happened somewhere where the visible growth ends up on the other side of the material. So, you know, roughly 80% of the time there isn't visible mold. And certainly where I was living, we didn't have any. So basically the situation in my case was they renovated the bathroom. Someone had made quite a serious mistake, and the waterproof membrane that normally directs the water down the drain had failed, and so the water was actually coming through under the carpet throughout the whole property. Now, you would think that you'd feel the carpet was wet, but we were on a northeast facing sunny corner, lots of ventilation. And when we moved in, it was right before Christmas. So in the Southern Hemisphere, if anyone's on the other side of the world, Christmas time is summertime here, and it's hot in Sydney and warm and dry. And so it never got saturated to the point where we recognized that. There was actually only one day where I said to my partner, I feel like the carpet feels a bit damp, but Sydney can be kind of humid, and I just wrote that off as surface moisture. So what happened was, it's probably a bit unusual because I wasn't working, and I think it would have been a lot more obvious more quickly I wasn't well if I was trying to get up and do 8 hours of work, 4 or 5 days a week. But essentially I had a couple of months off to rest because I'd just finished up a very busy year at work, and I wanted a bit of downtime. So yeah, February 1st, I tried to start work and was just exhausted. I couldn't focus. Physically, I found I was really tired, and I just kind of wrote that off as, it's been a busy year. I must be more tired. Maybe I'm not getting enough sleep. So I moved. I sort of thought I'll give myself another month because I had like 15 months to up my sleep. It was fine. But what I did do was I tried to get back into an exercise routine. And what would happen is every time I did a workout, I had to go back to bed for 4 hours. Now, I now know that that's called exertional fatigue or exercise intolerance, and it's a sign of mitochondrial dysfunction. In my case, the inflammation from my immune response was damaging my mitochondria, but that was weird. And then 19th of February, I had a styling session, and this is where my health actually went downhill very quickly. But during the styling session, I discovered some of my clothes didn't fit anymore, but many of them were just too tight. I'd obviously put on weight and not noticed it. And one of the characteristics of mold illness, or CIRS, is leptin resistance. And not all people who get CIRS put on weight. Sometimes they actually lose weight and just can't put it on, and they become pretty emaciated. But more often than not, it's the other way, and there's very rapid weight gain. I know one person who gained 30 kilos in 4 weeks. It's just extraordinary.
Wow.
Now, mine wasn't quite that extreme, but I did end up gaining, over 15 kilos, and that was over a few months. But again, I thought, I've just not been exercising. I've been on holiday mode. Maybe I've been eating a little more than I normally would. I don't know. And so again, I wrote it off. But what happened that day was we disturbed all the mold spores that were on my clothes. And so I developed allergies. Now, allergy symptoms, I think, are the most common people experience. And that's because those with my genetic makeup who are susceptible to mold toxins or mycotoxins make up about a third of the population. So there might be people living in moldy homes who never get these particular symptoms, but almost universally are the allergy type symptoms. So hay fever symptoms, except never goes away when the pollens die down or the seeds or the grasses do. So a big red flag is anyone who has to take antihistamines on the regular. So I was getting runny nose, watery eyes. Every time I would lay down in bed to go to sleep, my nose would get blocked. I started getting weird rashes like eczema. I've never had eczema in my life. And in fact, mold triggered my first and only asthma attack. Never had asthma growing up, but had asthma 37 because of mold. So those types of things are usually a big red flag. But what I will also say is mycotoxins, or the toxic chemicals that mold produces, damage the liver, damage the kidneys, damage the brain, and many of them are carcinogenic. And they're also, most of them are antibiotics. So IBS, gastrointestinal problems, candida, especially SIBO, I'm seeing are being triggered by people living in a moldy home. But also, if someone who doesn't have my genes isn't then made aware that the home is toxic, they could live there for several decades and then be diagnosed with kidney cancer out of the blue, or liver cancer. And it's like, well, that's weird. Doesn't run in my family. I don't have risk factors. Well, you've been exposed to hepatotoxic carcinogenic chemicals for 20 years in your home. But couple of the other classic things that do tend to happen quite frequently is chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. So those conditions are a product of some underlying fundamental issue. And I'm finding more and more it comes back to environmental toxicity. Now, for some people, it might be the final straw that breaks the camel's back, right? It's not necessarily the first thing that happens. Maybe they had some other pesticide exposure as a child, or maybe they had multiple antibiotics as a teenager for acne. That's really common. Then they went on the pill for 10 years, which depleted all the nutrients and changed their microbiome. And then they're in a stressful job. Then they move into a home that's got a water leak. And
sounds like a normal individual in Australia, doesn't it? What you just said,
Absolutely.
It sounds like a normal female, let's say, individual that's growing up in Australia. Exactly what the stages that you said they go through.
100%. So, it's basically going to impact every single human being, regardless of their genetic makeup. But for the 30% roughly of us that have an immune system that can't clear these toxins and therefore continues to stay in this inflamed state, we get much sicker much quicker. So we get referred to as, the canaries in the mine shaft. Now, I've used that term before, and for the younger generation who don't know what that is, I'll explain it. When you're mining for anything, obviously you can accidentally break open gas seams, or seams of toxic gases from deep in the earth that would kill you. And nowadays we have electronic sensors and alarms and warning systems for miners to get out of the mine if that happens. But before we did, they would actually hang little birds, canaries often, in the shaft. And if the birds stopped chirping, you knew, and they were dying, you knew there was a gas leak and you needed to get out. And so metaphorically speaking, I'm a human canary, and if I start to get sick in an environment, that's a big warning sign to everybody else in that environment that the environment is poisonous.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of a beneficial thing, but not really.
Well, so you know what? Now that I have recovered mostly, and now that I know what to look for, and now that I'm in a good environment, even prior to being in a good environment, I have reframed it as a blessing. However, it doesn't feel like that in the beginning when you're really sick. In fact, you feel cursed. Everyone's going about their normal lives. I mean, it changes everything. So for me, I can't just book an Airbnb and go away at all. In fact, pre-COVID, I would travel a lot for my job, attending, delivering seminars. There's only 5 hotels in Australia that I can stay in that are not mouldy. I've stayed in so many hotels. I can tell you 99% of them are mouldy, but purely because of poor ventilation. But waterproof membranes these days last 7 years. So if the hotel's 7 years or more older, it's going to have leaks. And, I can't go to restaurants. So if I get invited, and a good example of this was a girlfriend had a dinner in Manly. Manly's quite a very mouldy part of Sydney. I had to drive to the restaurant to check it before I accepted the invitation. Sadly, it was mouldy. And so I said to her, I'll just drop in for dessert at the end so I could kind of nip in and out quickly. I've yet to find a cinema that's not mouldy.
Wow.
So it's it can feel like a real burden. It can feel like a real curse. But at the same time, I'm now reaping the benefits of being aware. I'll give you one really good practical real life example of this. A lot of people who travel or travelled before COVID and hopefully will travel again find that they get sick when they travel, and will get a cold or a sore throat. And I would too. So whenever I would travel learning about mould, I would always travel with a couple of throat lozenges, some vitamin C, a throat spray, because my job was speaking. I couldn't afford to wake up and not be able to talk at the destination. And I always blamed it on the recycled air in the plane. But interestingly, they use HEPA filters on planes. It's actually some of the cleanest air you'll ever breathe. And I realized, now that I know what I know about mould and stopped staying in mouldy hotels, I never get sick when I travel now. It's the hotels, it's the Airbnbs, it's the motels, it's the mouldy glamping tents. it's the microbiome of the building that's making you sick. Or certainly for me, I've never gotten sick in the last 3 years of traveling if I haven't gone and stayed somewhere moldy. So I don't think it's the plane, FYI.
So interesting. Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that, because fortunately enough, I don't have as many those issues in that sense. And the thing that I do is, even though I always bring my air filter with me wherever I go, even if I stay at a girlfriend's house or at mum's or somewhere else, I always bring that with me, and that's right next to me, full, and it's got the HEP filter, it's got everything in there. It's just like going off the whole night. Everyone's like, Mahela, what's that? And I'm like, that's my baby. It has to come with me everywhere.
Yes. That is commitment.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, knowing what you know and knowing what we know, that's just normal. That's what you do. You bring that with you, and your sleep is so important that you're recovering in your sleep. The air that you breathe it has to be fresh, right? It has to be clean. So, wow, what a story. That's so amazing. Thanks so much for sharing that with us. That's such a vulnerable, raw part of yourself that, you know, a lot of people go through. And sometimes us being, you know, practitioners, naturopaths, so forth, people think that we don't go through health issues and we don't understand, and it's not something that we feel for them. Do you know what I mean? But everyone has their own journeys, everyone has their own health issues, everyone has their own things that they're going through in life. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us, and I bet you it's impacted the audience and being like, wow, I never even thought about these things. I never even thought about the air and so forth, and the mold and the renovations and so forth. But what I wanted to find out is, now there's a bit of change that's happened in your life. I want to find out, what does success look like for Amie at the moment? It would have changed a lot through the years from my understanding, but what does it look like at the moment?
Oh, you know what? It does. I think it changes with your stage of life and your goals, and I think particularly your values. And I've reached a point in my life where freedom is really important to me. That's one of my highest values, along with health. And that's in every sense of the word: freedom of self-expression, freedom to deliver on my purpose, the freedom to earn money in a way that makes a big impact on the world. And so for me, I'm actually just moving into a new working structure with my own business, and putting in some really powerful boundaries and scheduling things where my life, every aspect of my life, gets to feel good, and everything feels like a positive, expansive, uplifting choice, and not a burden or something that I resent doing. So that to me is true success for me anyway, personally, to be able to wake up every day, love what I do, make a living doing it, but doing it in the way that I want to do it as well. And really being able to live my values, I think is what it boils down to.
Yeah, I love that it's freedom, because a lot of us don't really, we think we are free, but we're not really, unless we actually think about it. Isn't it? When you actually...
you really have to consciously cultivate it. And those things expand out as well. Like for me, freedom was earning enough money to live in a home that I loved and do the things that I loved. But then I felt quite trapped working in one location and then being beholden to someone else's priorities. And so then I expanded to the next level of freedom for myself. And, it's a real balancing act, but I think, we do think that we're free, and it's not until you push up against the edges that you realize, actually, there are some things that might be limiting me. And so I really have consciously worked towards moving the fence, if you like, to somewhere that feels more spacious for me.
Yeah, and giving yourself the opportunity, the safety net of being able to move that fence, because a lot of us are like, oh, should we move that fence? Oh, we'll wait for future Mahela to do it. Like, we just keep waiting. So that's amazing that you're doing that.
Yeah, thank you.
That's brilliant. All right. Well, the audience is probably like, let's talk about EMFs. Let's get into it. Let's talk about the topic. I'm excited for this because I know only a little bit about this, and the more I find out, I'm just mind blown about this. So today's podcast is going to be amazing, this topic that we're going to go into. So, I mean, they are not a new phenomenon. However, during the 20th century, environmental exposure to man-made electromagnetic fields has been steadily increasing as growing electricity demands, ever-advancing technologies, and changes in social behavior has created more and more artificial sources of EMFs. For the audience, what are EMFs?
So it's a really massive subject, but electromagnetic radiation is a spectrum. And I suppose if I can initially lump them into two main categories. We've got ionizing radiation. And when you hear the word radiation, it's ionizing radiation that most people think of. So it's gamma rays, it's nuclear power, it's X-rays, and it's the uppermost end of the electromagnetic spectrum where the frequency is super high, the energy is super high, and it causes instant DNA damage, which is why it's considered unsafe at any dose. And so we haven't always known that. They used to X-ray kids' feet at retail stores to make sure that they got the right shoe fit. And, you know, now everyone wears lead-lined. Yeah, I know.
I did not know that. That's crazy. Yeah.
Honestly, as humans, I don't know whether we just are so excited about a new invention we don't think logically about the risk. They used to spray children with DDT to keep
I've seen that.
You know, it's wild, and we're making the same mistakes with EMS now, but we'll get into that in a second. But you know, ionizing radiation we now understand is really quite deadly at any dose. There is no dose that's considered safe, which is why, you know, the use of X-rays is considered very carefully, and MRIs as well, things like that. So when most people hear electromagnetic radiation, they think of that end of the spectrum, but it's actually a lot bigger than that, and we have a huge range of non-ionizing radiation to consider as well. And I'll talk about the things that are in that spectrum in a second, but basically the mistake that is currently being made, and at this point it is being supported by financial agendas. There is a mountain of evidence to show it's an issue, but because it's non-ionizing, it was incorrectly classified as harmless, and that's because it didn't cause instant DNA damage. But we now know there's multiple mechanisms of action that non-ionizing radiation has on biology, human biology, and all living things that causes cell damage, including single and double-stranded DNA breaks, which we know to be one of the mechanisms that cause cancer.
Correct.
And but it's the difference between, you know, dropping a frog in a boiling pot of water or putting one at room temperature and slowly dialing up the heat. It's a cumulative issue. It's a little bit like asbestos and cigarettes. There's a latency period with illness that's very, very lengthy, and it's a cumulative dose, and it's about how much over what period of time you get. And so because it doesn't make you instantly damaged, it's been lumped as harmless, and it's absolutely not the case. Now, in the electromagnetic spectrum that's non-ionizing, we have everything from very low frequencies, electric fields and magnetic fields, which we get from any appliances and the wiring in our home. Then we move up to the wireless band, which is radio waves. So this is where there's more energy, the frequency is higher, and so information can be transmitted wirelessly. It doesn't have to run along a cable to be delivered. And so that goes up right through from the radio band, the cell phone frequencies. Obviously high frequency 5G is kind of the next thing that we're looking at. And then above, and there's obviously millimeter, that's when you get into the millimeter wave spectrum, microwaves, literally the same microwaves that microwave ovens use to cook food. A different power density, but again, it's slow cook or fast cook. Like, you really have to be mindful that whilst they're not identical, they're same, but different. Then you've got visible light, and that's obviously the one part of the electromagnetic spectrum that we can see. Then we move up into obviously high frequency ultraviolet light, and then we start to inch closer to ionizing radiation. Now, I want to also add that we do have natural EMFs as well, and of course visible light falls into that. So another willfully ignorant argument, if you like, is, EMFs, Earth has its own EMFs, space has its own EMFs. Yes, it does. However, there's some big differences around natural EMFs and man-made EMFs. First of all, we actually evolved and developed and are designed to thrive under terrestrial and cosmic radiation. Now, we know too much sun will burn your skin, and if you keep doing that, you're likely to develop skin cancer. We're not saying natural EMFs are 100% safe either, but you will actually get sick if you're not exposed to terrestrial radiation, so the natural EMFs of the Earth, and also cosmic radiation. And the Earth's natural EMFs are direct current, and they do not pulsate. They are a linear type of wave. And so our cells love that. They thrive on it. It informs genetic expression, and it's healthful. It's also very low frequency, and it's very low density. You need very special meters to actually measure it. Now, in the last 100 years, we've increased our man-made EMF exposure by a quintillion fold.
Wow.
Now, if you write that down, I think it's 16 zeros.
That's huge.
Extraordinary. And it's also high frequency. It's very dense. The power density, especially if you're in a major city, is extreme and hazardous. And it's also non-linear. It's pulsed. And so this actually has an impact on our cellular biology that direct current doesn't have, because our man-made currents are alternating current based. And so they're very, very different, and the level of exposure is very, very high. Our proximity to the source is very close as well. And so we are irradiating ourselves, and we're going to pay for it. We already are. I guess there's EMF canaries as well, and anyone with a chronic illness can develop EMF sensitivity. And, we're going to see over the coming decades more and more issues. But again, a bit like with mould illness, some of the symptoms can be misdiagnosed or written off as too hard basket, or, like often is the case with tricky patients, they're dubbed hypochondriacs or referred to a psychiatrist.
Correct. And we see that happening all the time. You're on point. Individuals come and go, I know something's wrong, I don't know what it is. And then because they can't put their finger onto it, they're unsure where it is. But you were saying about signs and symptoms. What are some what are some signs and symptoms that you would think would come from EMF exposure?
Well, it sort of depends on the type of EMF. So like I also sort of left out artificial light and blue light there, but that's sort of in there as well. So obviously with artificial light, we're messing with our diurnal circadian rhythms. We're also messing with our monthly rhythms as well. So insomnia, and of course, as soon as you get that, we know with shift workers that loss of diurnal rhythms increases the risk of cancer, anxiety, depression, weight gain, type 2 diabetes, all of that sort of stuff. So that's artificial light alone. But then you've got electric fields, you've got magnetic fields, and then you've got radio frequencies, which is the wireless radiation. So for some people, it'll be headaches and insomnia, fibromyalgia type pains. For me, it's heart palpitations. I get like heart flutters if I've been on my phone and it hasn't been hardwired. It can be numbness in the hands and the face, anywhere with proximity. It damages cells that turn over particularly quickly. So it causes sperm damage, it causes egg damage. So it can create, certainly in animal studies, and also in human studies, we know it lowers sperm motility, it affects sperm morphology, it impacts fertility in humans. But in animals, we've seen a rise in birth defects, autism, other learning difficulties, things like that. And, you know, with the impact on DNA damage, we know that's a very serious thing, and what that's going to cause down the line. But often it's chronic illnesses, poor energy, confusion, delirium, pain, feeling nauseous. I also can feel a bit nauseous if I've been on a wireless device for too long. And I get like a bit of a weird headache. It's unlike a normal headache or a migraine, but it just feels like an inflamed brain kind of feeling. So there's a lot of different symptoms. Headaches are a really common one. I had a patient actually who she was quite fit, personal trainer, ate really well, and she was waking up with headaches every morning, and she was sleeping with her cell phone under her pillow every night and not on flight mode. And seriously, stopped her doing that, her headaches went away.
That's a no-go, isn't it? That's the first thing, is put it on the flight mode. Do not charge it next to your bedside table. That's the worst thing. Don't charge it. You're going to charge your phone away from you.
Yeah, you really don't want any electronic devices in the bedroom, but like bed lamps are quite common, but they'll create an electric field, and when they're on, they're creating magnetic fields. So at the end of the day, when you're ready to go to sleep, you should actually pull them out from the wall at the plug. You can flick them switch off, and that will lower the magnetic fields. And there's way more research on magnetic fields and the health issues they cause than electric fields. But when there's an electric field there, the electrons are present in the wiring ready to go, and they always need to find their way back to ground. That's why you have an earth point on all the wiring. And they will often try and ground in water or anything that's water-based. And our bodies are mostly water. And so you'll actually attract the electric fields. And so if you pull it out from the wall, you actually just take it offline entirely. Wow. The same goes for electric blankets. And I know some of those heated blankets are really popular now, especially in winter, probably in Melbourne. They're really popular.
In isolation, on the couch with Netflix.
Totally. So cozy. I get it. And because of mould, I had really bad circulation as a kid, chilblains, freezing in bed. And so I was really naughty. Mum would want us to turn it off when we went to sleep, and then I'd turn it back on after they went back to bed because I was so cold. I
like how that's you consider as naughty. I love it.
I look back and I think, my God, it's like, how am I even still alive? But it's,
Mums know best.
Yeah, mums do know best. Sorry, mum. But children are especially vulnerable, and this is actually a real issue when it comes to where you buy your home, where the smart meter is, where the wiring is in the house, and you don't want to live within 600 metres of high voltage power lines because they're associated with a doubling in incidence of childhood leukemia. So, their cells are dividing much more rapidly. Their immune system is still developing. Their skulls are thinner. They are just even more vulnerable than adults to exposure to EMFs. And so, even as adults, we need to be far more careful than we are. Most people are just completely unaware, but for children especially, it's very, very dangerous.
I can just imagine. Yeah, that's absolutely. You've shared so much information about EMFs, and talking about the signs and symptoms, they're a bit kind of all over the place. It's kind of just like you're not feeling well. You've got a little bit of fatigue, a little bit of chills, poor circulation, this, that. You kind of most people just write them off, those signs and symptoms, because it's just so easy to write off those types of feelings because they're not particularly associated to a disease, one particular or two diseases.
Yeah, that's right.
So, so what I found really interesting doing a bit of research on the EMFs is that in 1996, the World Health Organization launched a large multidisciplinary research due to the concerns over possible health effects from exposure to an ever-increasing number of electromagnetic field sources. So they actually looked into it, which was really interesting. So based on the recent in-depth review of scientific literature, the World Health Organization concluded that current evidence does not confirm the existence of any health consequences from exposure to low-level electromagnetic fields, which was really interesting reading that what I wanted to know, particularly your thoughts on that.
So that statement is really outdated, and they have acknowledged that it is, and they should do more investigation. But a lot of people don't realize the World Health Organization is not an independent organization. And when you actually, there's some really good books, actually, The Corporate Ties That Bind. When you look at the corporate corruption and the kind of money that governments stand to make with selling, particularly the high frequency spectrum that's coming out now, it's not in their financial interest to find an issue. It also creates liability problems whereby you've got telecommunications providers who actually know that their radio frequencies are dangerous. As soon as an organisation like that changes their position, that opens up huge liability issues. In fact, the CSIRO put together a group of engineers to study the impact of wireless radiation on the public around the same time, and they were funded by a telecommunications provider, actually, but they were independent engineers. And this is the thing, most of the studies that show no harm are funded by telcos, so they're completely biased and not worth the paper that they're printed on. But the Barnett report that was produced as a result of that study raised grave concerns about the exposure to wireless radiation on the Australian public, particularly for the elderly, the unwell, vulnerable, and children. And basically the CSIRO disbanded the group, made all of the engineers redundant, and withdrew the Barnett report from public accessibility, and just buried it because it didn't suit their agenda. And, you know, it's quite funny. This does sometimes happen. There's a recent study that was published, the NTP study. Telcos spent $25 million on testing rats to prove that that radio frequencies were harmless, and many of the rats died, got cancer, and developed a particular type of heart problem. Anyway, they're claiming that the study was flawed and it's not true, and they're going to do it again. But when you look at independent studies, there is an overwhelming body of evidence that shows, particularly for wireless, that's probably the most rapidly growing area of research. I think partly because it's the most rapidly growing area of exposure. With electric fields, pretty much you've just got the wireless, the wiring in your house and in all of your devices. Magnetic fields, when anything's on, that's being created. And unless you're a device junkie, most people might have one TV, maybe two. You might have one speaker, maybe two, one fridge, one washing machine. We're not living, unless you're working in an electronics store where everything's on, your exposure kind of peaks at a certain level and it doesn't go any further. It's the wireless radiation that is really, bolting ahead. And so that's where the bulk of the research is being done at the moment. But when you you go through all of the studies that say, so currently the English studies that have been published are being collated by ORSA, or the Oceanic Radio Frequency Scientific Association. And if you look at the 2,500 studies or so that don't appear to show harmful biological effects, every single one of them except for one, you can see that it's been funded by a telco company or an industry provider. And the one that you can't see, you just don't know who's paid for that study. I mean, I'd be willing to bet it was a telco company. And on the flip side of that, we have 7,500 studies that show harm. Now, there are also studies that don't show effect or a mild effect. We know the limitations of scientific research. It's very difficult to get a control anymore because we're just blanketed in radiation. Not all studies are designed well. There are other mitigating factors sometimes you can't control for. I will also say that there's a particular type of medicinal application of EMF called PEMF, or pulsed electromagnetic fields, that actually have been shown to have beneficial health effects. So you have to be very careful at what you're looking at, what frequency, what power density, how was it applied, what were they actually studying. Like I get a lot of people sending me EMF shielding advices saying, devices, sorry, are these good? And then, but it's been scientifically proven. And then I go and look at the evidence and it's like a laughable document. But they might be looking at heart rate variability, and I suspect that particular study was actually more about the electric fields. So it was grounding the electric fields, and it wasn't about the wireless radiation at all. But poorly designed studies that are not looking at, there's a number of biomarkers we now know are being triggered when people are exposed. So, for example, there's a protein called SB100 that actually indicates the breakdown of the blood-brain barrier. Now, this is one of the reasons why EMFs can cause secondary problems, because the blood-brain barrier is designed to keep toxins out of the brain once that's weakened. In fact, in medicine, they will sometimes use EMFs to damage the blood-brain barrier to let chemo into the brain to treat brain tumours. And so, if that isn't enough to start you thinking and reconsidering your exposure, I don't know what will be.
I know if they're using that for those benefits and they understand that it does to the blood-brain barrier, it's kind of like, well, what does that do every day then?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It's just mind-blowing. And I love how you mentioned the studies. And when we're looking at studies, there's so many things we've taken considerations, like you said, who funded it, what was the actual hypothesis, what was the conclusion, what was the method, how long was it run for, how many people were done it by. So, when someone just says it's scientifically proven, I would take that with a pinch of salt and actually look more into it, or get someone who understands it to look more into it for you. So there's so many, and that's why there's so much information out there at the moment with EMFs and things like that saying, it's not that bad for you. But what does that mean? It's kind of like saying, it's kind of like for me saying, I'm not tired. For me, I'm not tired is totally different to someone else not being tired. And, it's so individualized. And it's I love that you mentioned that in there, that it's just who it's run by, what the agenda is. And it's just mind blowing.
I think the latency period's probably like one of the biggest factors, because it's like putting someone in a room and exposing them to one cigarette and saying, look, they didn't get lung cancer. Cigarettes don't cause lung cancer. Cigarettes don't cause lung damage. Their lungs are fine 24 hours later. But, cell phones really are the new cigarettes, and we're now being exposed to 50 cigarettes every day, in our home. And you might be fine in 6 to 12 months' time. You might be fine in 5 years' time, but you keep that up and you won't be fine. It's just really a matter of time. And so I think that's really where the challenge is. Now, I understand I love the internet for a start, and I love the possibilities the internet brings to the world. I really do. I wouldn't want to be without technology and electricity and hot water and my cell phone. However, we are just rampantly consuming the next thing without actually realizing the impact it has on our physiology, and which means no one's really mindful of the safer ways to use them. And it has allowed, of course, those who are profiting off technology manufacture to just run rampant. But if you actually look at the small print, even on your phones, even the manufacturers say, don't use this on your body. And the safety testing, so most people think, and this is a fair enough assumption too, they wouldn't sell it if it wasn't safe. I wouldn't be allowed to buy it. Now, depending on which country you're in, some countries are a lot more stringent with what they'll allow on the shelves, like chemical-wise. For example, the EU are pretty strict. Sadly, Australia is just a she'll be right, mate. And then you have
until proven wrong. Yeah, you have to prove that
totally,
it's toxic.
It's idiotic. It's absolutely idiotic. It's so reckless.
It's on the shelves for a few years until you can prove that it shouldn't be on the shelves.
100%. And, we're facing the same situation with wireless radiation. And so, I appreciate communications have changed things for humankind. But at the same time, we need to actually be a lot smarter about how we're using it and mindful of balancing the benefits with the risks. And, we do have a lot better ways of doing things that would dramatically reduce our exposure, but no one's talking about it because most people don't want to believe it's harmful, because then they'll actually have to change their habits and behavior and take responsibility for their health, which is always a tough pill to swallow. And it also means there's no way the telcos will ever be the ones to volunteer this information, because it's their bread and butter, and the liability issues are going to be a huge problem. They're going to be a problem anyway. Class actions are coming. It's just a matter of time. But in the meantime, that doesn't help you if in 5 years' time you're diagnosed with breast cancer because you kept putting your cell phone in your bra every time you went walking in the morning. That isn't going to save you. That isn't going to make you feel better. That isn't going to undo what's happened. So my personal mission is to educate and empower the individuals to make better choices with their tech. Practice safe tech, please.
I love that. So what I was going to say is the fact that here in Victoria, most of us have been working from home, right? And in this podcast, we're talking about how we can have EMFs at work. So there's a bit of it's kind of home, or is it work, or is it work, or is it home? So what ran past my head is I would love to see a bit of research or anything that's happening in Victoria, or those individuals that have been working from home and they haven't actually been able to go outside for more than 1 hour or 2 hours a day. So they haven't been able to ground themselves, which we're going to go into later for EMFs and things like that. They've just been literally in this EMF exposure like 24/7. But what I wanted to know from you is so people have made a bit more aware. What type of EMFs are they exposing themselves to at work, besides you having a laptop, the person next to you having a laptop, and then having wireless internet? Is there anything else they should be wary of?
Yes, there's a few things. And just before I list them, I will tell you the calls, bookings for building biologists have gone through the roof since lockdown, especially in Melbourne, because people are realising, stuck in their house 24 hours a day, that there's problems. Mould as well, but EMFs too. And Victoria, unfortunately, has a policy where smart meters are being rolled out, and they're making it very difficult for people to opt out or get an alternative. So the exposure for smart meters is very high in Victoria as well, which is unfortunate. But basically at home, so cell phone is number one. People are worried about cell phone towers, as they should be, but in all honesty, at the moment, unless you live within about 200 meters of a cell phone tower, you're going to be getting more wireless off your cell phone. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't worry about the cell tower either, and maybe shielding, whatever, but this is the number one risk for people. So there's a couple of things to be mindful of. Most people will have it on their desk right next to them, so they can see the notifications every time it goes bing.
Get a dopamine rush.
We'll let the light up the neural circuits. That's a whole other issue. They're engineered for addiction, and this is also the cognitive dissonance that occurs when people don't want to know about the health risks. But anyway, here's what I tell people. There's a couple of things you can do, and it does depend on your circumstances. So I always have my phone in flight mode, and I will take it out of flight mode to check things maybe 4 or 5 times a day, before work, mid-morning, lunch, mid-afternoon, evening. Now, I love Instagram. So if I'm going to sit on the couch or in bed scrolling the gram, I will hardwire my phone. So it's not using wireless or Wi-Fi. It's in flight mode, but it's connected to the internet via a cord. Now, I can't receive or make calls that way. But if I go to make or receive calls, I'll either use wireless air tubes, or I'll have it on speaker, as far away from my body where the sound quality is still good, keep my calls short, maybe text or voice memo instead. Now, obviously, if your job is one where you're answering calls all day, you can't have it in flight mode. But what I would do is I would keep it well away from your body. I would actually, if you've got a landline, redirect it to your landline and use a corded phone instead, or maybe voice over internet via Skype or through Zoom, so that you're not, using your cell phone anywhere near your body. Just a quick pause in what you're being exposed to and what you should do. Most people don't know how cell phones are tested. Okay, the safety testing was done in 1996 and was published in 1998 on the kind of cell phone that was available then, by the way, not what we have now. But the testing was done on a plastic dummy with a head full of water, salt, and sugar.
Now, that's exactly what we are. That's what we are. I mean, I'm that, aren't you?
Well, maybe that's how they view us. I don't know. But if that's not the very definition of unscientific, I don't know what is. But what they're looking for is the thermal effect. Does this heat the water? And they basically measure, every phone has a SAR rating, a specific absorption ratio, and it's based on that. Now, that completely ignores all of the non-thermal biological effects we now know cell phones generate, and all wireless frequencies generate to one degree or another. And so again, they are willfully knowingly avoiding doing any tests that would show a biological effect, because no one wants to know about it. So you've got to, that's the first thing you need to do. Sort out your everyday exposure to that. There was a brain surgeon in Sydney who said we can't train brain surgeons fast enough to cut the tumours out of the heads of people from cell phone use.
Oh my gosh.
So if you take nothing away from this conversation, that is the one thing you need to sort out. The other thing I will say is often cordless phones produce even more radiation than a cell phone. So I know it sounds horribly old-fashioned. I shudder at the thought as well, but a corded phone is the way to go, or use voice over internet and have a hardwired computer. So definitely getting rid of that exposure is your number one priority. But then for most people, they're going to be working on a digital device, whether it's an iPad or a laptop or a desktop computer. So again, a couple of simple things. To reduce your exposure to wireless radiation, get rid of your wireless modem and hardwire everything. Now, obviously that means you can't walk around your house, scrolling the gram while you're making lunch or on the toilet. We all do it. I know you do it too. But maybe what you can do is hardwire when you're 8 hours at your desk or whatever it is. You can turn the Wi-Fi modem on when you go on your lunch break. You're cutting down your exposure to 1 hour from 20 hours. If you are using wireless, crying out loud, please stay as far away from the modem as possible. Don't sit anywhere near it, and turn it off at night when you're sleeping so you're not being exposed unnecessarily. So wireless radiation is big. The other thing though is the electric and magnetic fields that are generated from the computer. So if you've got a desktop, well, there's no battery backup. It has to be plugged in. So keep the power board as far away as possible. Keep the cords away from you. Obviously, there's a limit to that because you've got to be able to see it, and you're probably got a keyboard attached to it. But distance is key. If you're on a laptop, you don't ever want to be using it while it's plugged in and charging. I know sometimes that's unavoidable for short periods of time.
I'm just going to unplug mine right now.
Good girl. The other thing is I would also swap most laptop chargers have got 2 prongs and not 3, which means your charging cord is not grounded. So swap it for a 3-pronged charger. That'll reduce the electric fields that try to go to ground on you. But yeah, charge it overnight. Take it, use it unplugged, and then charge it over your lunch break again, and then unplug it when you go back to it. I just think a lot of people don't realize that that's creating a significant magnetic field when it's charging that you don't want to be sitting inside of. So they would probably be the biggest things, I think. Maybe a couple of other things to be mindful of is, where are you working from at home? Like if you're working in the kitchen, especially if your kitchen's quite small, the more power a device or appliance draws, the bigger the magnetic field. And so ovens and fridges and induction cooking tops tend to be what the biggest magnetic field generators in a home. You don't want to be sitting near those. You also don't want to be sitting somewhere opposite, or near a smart meter. So if the smart meter's on your lounge wall, maybe go to the dining table on the other side of the house. So they would probably be the main things I would say. And maybe just touching on artificial light, if you're working after sunset, definitely invest in quality researched blue blockers. There's a lot of blue blockers on the market who don't do anything, and some that do. That can have a significant impact on reducing the melatonin suppression. Ideally, you don't want to be working on them after hours, but I deliver a lot of education in the evenings after dinner time for people, because that's the time that works best for them. So it's not always avoidable either, especially if you've got an international business. But they would be the biggest things, I think, that would make the most significant difference to people and reduce their exposure in a really powerful and meaningful way, without really cramping your style too much as well. It's not going to significantly inhibit or disable your ability to do your work. It's just maybe a couple of extra steps when you're kind of unhooking and hooking things up.
Which is valuable, extra steps to get some movement happening.
That's true.
So the key would be to get I think it's an ether cable, is that right, into your laptop?
Ethernet cable.
And then you can get one also for your phone.
Yes, you can. Yeah, you totally can.
Okay.
Easy to order off the internet, super cheap, very easy to set up. It might feel a little bit awkward and challenging to start with because you've never done it before, but it's honestly a plug and play situation. Probably the one thing though that actually I do have two more tips for you. With the wireless modems, the newer ones are coming out with two signals, two emitters. And what's happening is the telecommunications grid are trying to provide free public Wi-Fi hotspots for everyone using your device. And so what can happen when you turn the button off on your modem, your signal goes dead, but the public signal remains active. So it's almost like you didn't turn your Wi-Fi router off. So if you are using wireless, unplug it at night. But what I also want to say is you can switch it off while you're using Ethernet. So obviously make sure they get both of them switched off. But the other thing that I didn't mention is wireless modems were first created for businesses. They were a business device. And as such, they needed to be powerful enough to put a wireless signal out across a commercial building floor, maybe a couple of floors. So they're very strong. You've got to think of them but much like a cell phone, sometimes stronger, but you can power them down by 95% and still get a perfectly strong signal at home. So it involves logging into your online ISP profile, and actually you've got to do it manually. You might need to get your ISP to help you, but it means you reduce your exposure from that device by 95% and still get great wireless internet. I mean,
that's mind-blowing. That's amazing. That's awesome. That's on point. I love that. The other thing I wanted to find out is I know a lot of people buy these stickers that they put on their phone, on their laptop.
Trying not to roll my eyes.
Sorry. There's also things that you plug into electricity and supposed to, I forgot what it's called. It's supposed to give like a, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, harmonizer and things like that. And I mean, people just want the best for themselves. And I mean, I know there's always these marketing things that we fall for. And I just wanted to find out, is it a marketing thing that we can fall for?
Unfortunately, there's a lot of stuff out there that does nothing, and those definitely fall into that category. And it breaks my heart to say that, because of course we want to do, we want the best of both worlds. I do. We want to be able to slap a sticker on something and say that's helping me. Look, there's two things I want to say about that. First of all, we are electrical beings. We produce our own electromagnetic field, and I think in theory, there must be ways where we can strengthen our own electromagnetic field so it is less impacted by external fields. Now, look, man-made stuff is super strong. I honestly don't think there'll be anything that we can do that will make us able to withstand talking on our cell phones, holding at our head. But I do think that one day there might be things that harmonize, that potentially do strengthen our field and repel other magnetic fields. That won't happen for wireless. It won't happen for electric fields, but magnetic fields are a significant health hazard. And if we can do something to support ourselves, great. But we don't yet have that technology. We certainly do not have devices that can measure those benefits either. And so currently it's all marketing. It's all marketing, and most of it is actually garbage. There's a couple out there that have been very thoughtfully put together, and I can see the intention is to genuinely create a result. But currently, the best thing you can do is reduce your exposure, put more distance between you and the source, and reduce your time. And so that's where the focus needs to be. As far as all of those things, if you test them, they do not reduce your exposure. So therefore, how can they reduce the biological impact on your body? They can't. It's I don't doubt that the people that sell them believe in them. I really don't. I think they think they're doing a good thing. And I will also say, you and I both know the placebo effect is also quite powerful. And there's been some incredible studies to show that our bodies can do incredible things at the suggestion of it. But you need to think about like this. Is there an antioxidant you can take that will allow you to smoke 20 cigarettes a day and never get lung cancer? You just wouldn't do it. You just wouldn't do it. And so that's where I would position these things. Yeah.
I love that. I thought I'll ask that, put that in there. The other thing is also a lot of individuals who are working, like you said, they're on their phone, they're doing this, they're doing that. What is the difference between wired headphones and ear pods? Because I know you've put up a few posts on Instagram about it, and I would love for you to share a bit about it.
So anything that runs wirelessly is producing wireless radiation. So anything that connects via Bluetooth or, like that. So testing some of those wireless earphones, earpods, they're all much of a muchness. Some of them are producing more radiation than your cell phone, and they're constantly emitting as well. So is your cell phone, but certain aspects, there's a number of different antennas in your phone. Certain aspects of the phone are seeking a source more frequently than others. But the wireless headphones are constantly seeking a source. They use Bluetooth most of the time, which is 2.45 gigahertz. That's a particular frequency and wavelength that seems to be causing more problems than the longer radio frequency waves. And so they need to be treated like a cell phone. You avoid putting them on or near your head ever, except in desperate situations. And so I would never have them. I was given a set of Apple AirPods for Christmas a couple of years ago, and legendary present. I love Apple, and who doesn't want a cool little pair of earbuds? And the convenience of not having wires around, I totally get it. They annoy me as well. But I took them straight back to the store and got a store credit because I will never wear them. Yeah. I'll never wear an Apple Watch. I'll never wear a wireless Garmin, whatever, unless it's something that can store information and you can put in flight mode and then you can connect it at the end of the day. You're literally radiating yourself, and it's invisible. And I think that's what makes it so hard for people to wrap their head around. You can see cigarette smoke, you can see the pollution coming out of an industrial smokestack, and you're like, ooh, I don't want to breathe that. I don't want that on me. You can't see wireless radiation unless you've got a meter and you're sort of picking it up and testing it. You can just pretend it's not there. And that's really unfortunate.
And you can get your hands on some meters if you wish to test it yourself. Is that right?
Can. So you need different types of meters to test different types of EMFs. That being said, I've got one which I recommend.
Right here.
I actually didn't prepare this earlier, but I was testing something in my office or somewhere. I swept the house, actually. We've just moved into a new place. We're in a townhouse, though, between two other townhouses. And you never know what's on the other side of the wall, what your neighbour's doing, where their Wi-Fi router is. And so I'm pretty sure it was just yesterday, I actually went around and swept all of our common walls because I just wanted to check, particularly in our bedroom. It's really the places you spend the most of time that you've got to worry about. But I did everything because I'm a nerd like that. And,
I love that.
Just to kind of see, and I'm so stoked we're in such a low EMF environment. It's amazing. But Basically, this is not a professional meter. If I was to go and do an EMF audit for somebody, I would have a different meter for the wireless as I would for electric and magnetic fields, and they're very, very expensive and you need training to use them. But so this one doesn't take peak holds, it doesn't do density, it doesn't have a tri-axis antenna, so you get like a full load. But what this does is it's like, I call it like a sniffer dog. It identifies where there's a problem, and then if you do something to change the situation, you can obviously see it go down or not. And so there is a link in my bio on Instagram to get these. They are the best priced, consumer accurate, easy to use meter that I've been able to find so far. There's one other one, the Cornet, but it's bigger and bulkier, and I just prefer this. I prefer this one because I used to travel a lot, and it obviously slips into my handbag really easily. But it also has this really great traffic light system, which you might be able to see.
Yeah.
So you don't even need to know the what's good or bad as far as building biology ratings go. It'll tell you green's good, yellow's maybe not so good, red's really bad. So you can easily get one of those to check your home if you've got kids. If getting an EMF out to do the testing is out of your budget, it's really important, especially for babies. I am absolutely ropeable with the amount of wireless exposure that's happening to kids at the moment.
Baby monitors.
Baby monitors, Bluetooth nappies to tell you when they're wet, Bluetooth socks to tell you that they're still breathing overnight. Like, I understand that as a parent, you don't ever stop worrying about your children, especially when they're little, and all of these things can seem really helpful. But they are absolutely dangerous to be using and ridiculous. At this point,
it hurts me.
Yeah. So any mums and dads are listening out there, please don't buy any wireless things for your kid. I had a mum friend who years ago, would put white noise on her phone and pop it next to the baby's head in the cot. And, it wasn't until I sort of said, oh, I hope that's on flight mode, that she didn't even know that was a problem. These, all those sorts of things. There's cribs that rock your baby. Well, the magnetic fields on that are shocking. They're just, people just don't know, and it's such a shame because we know that magnetic field exposure, particularly when it comes to high voltage lines, double the risk of leukemia in a child. And we're seeing childhood cancers escalate out of control, allergies, autoimmune conditions. Now, there's lots of environmental factors that can contribute, but EMFs are the one thing that has just gone through the roof, especially in the last 20 years, but in the last 100 years, it's one of the single most significant factors, and we can't see it, which is what makes it, I think, even more dangerous, because
a lot easier to ignore too. Yeah, a lot easier to ignore, and we can't see it, out of sight, out of mind. It's not happening here to us. 100%. One thing that I want to touch base before we finish off is we spoke a lot about mold at the start of the episode, and you mentioned you have that little tool for EMFs. Is there a little tool that people can get their hands on for moisture, for mold exposure? Yeah.
Well, look, to assess a home or any building for mold is a complex process that involves sampling, moisture mapping, all kinds of investigations. But there are sort of three things I do recommend every household has. Now, one is a thermohygrometer, which is just a little sensor that tells you the relative humidity of your home. Now, certain climates have a tendency to be more humid than others, some particularly all year round, like Sydney and where I am in subtropical, New South Wales. And basically, you want your relative humidity to be between 45 and 55% in the home as a constant. Anything lower than 45, it gets a bit dry and bad for human health. But once you hit 60 and over, we start to see dust mite proliferation, which causes allergies and mold growth as well. And so what happens when you slip outside that and you go above sort of 55 and you creep closer to 60, you want to run your dehumidifier. So that's the second tool that I would recommend, having a dehumidifier. They're useful too if you've had a lot of rain, for example. Maybe your place isn't normally that humid, but it's all of a sudden it's been stormy, or you've had a water leak. You need to get building materials dried in 48 hours. Otherwise, you have a mold problem, which then leads me to the third tool is a moisture meter. Now, a building biologist will have, quite a expensive, complex moisture meter, but you can get cheap, effective moisture meters from Bunnings and other hardware stores that are good enough to tell you whether there's a problem. There's been a leak in your roof and you can see that that area of the ceiling is a lot wetter or damper than the other part. Or you can check the outside of your bathroom, to see if the waterproof membranes are failing or if there's been a burst pipe, and then you can act much more quickly. So it's all about managing moisture, so drying up spills really quickly, getting leaks dry really quickly, and keeping the humidity right. And, there's lots of things we do as humans that contribute to mold growth without knowing it. Hands up if you've ever gone to bed with wet hair. I did that a lot as a teenager. Moldy pillows.
That's actually, it's so interesting you say that, because like my grandma would come from Eastern Europe. That is one of the things that you do not do. If she sees you with wet hair, she'll get the shoe and chase you with it. You cannot have wet hair. It has to be dried. So it's interesting you say that.
Yes.
There's a reason why. They know.
Yes. So much wisdom from our, ancestors. There's also partly the loss of heat through the head, and the traditional Chinese medicine will say loss of qi, loss of heat, damp, illness. There's a few elements, but don't ever go to bed with wet hair. But if you're drying clothes inside, which you will be if it's rainy and a load of washing needed to be done, that water has to go somewhere. You don't want that evaporating into your couch and into your walls and into your mattress and into your cushions. You want to suck that out of the air and into the dehumidifier. Same with cooking. If you're someone who likes long showers and your extractor fan's not very good, or you're not letting the steam out through the window, many people, and I did this too, you have a shower, especially if you're showering in the morning, you're getting ready for work, and then the mirror's all foggy. Open the bathroom window to let the steam out to clear the mirror quicker, and you've just let all that water go into the rest of your home, and you're creating a mold problem without even realizing it. So being mindful of your moisture management is a really important key.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. There's like so many things that you've mentioned to us, so many tips and tricks and to keep an eye out on. I appreciate you sharing all of this with us. So now we've come to the end of the podcast, and to finish off, I ask all my guests, I want to know, what is your natural health hack? What's one thing that Amie does that's her little secret, but will no longer be a secret once you tell us that you do maybe every day, and it just gets your health to be on point the way it is?
I've got a good one for you. It's kind of a new one. So
I'm excited.
Being a health practitioner, we have a lot of health hacks, right? And I've been, there's been things I've been doing for 20 years or more. But just recently, I have been really mindful of my exposure to artificial light. And my husband and I are planning to start a family soon, and I'm looking at my hormones, and our hormones are a reflection of quality of our environment and how well we're looking after ourselves. And I'm going to have a too much information moment here for your listeners, but my cycle's a bit on the long side. And so I'm ovulating sort of day 16, 17. And if you ovulate sort of day 17 and later, your risk of birth defects and miscarriages go through the roof. Same if you're ovulating pre-day 12. So ideally you want like a 28 and a half, 29-day cycle, ovulating as close to day 14 as possible. So I've been looking at all of the things I need to do to bring my cycle into a better balance, and stress management is a massive one. But what I started doing was at sunset, no artificial light. So I've got a couple of reading lights that have just red LEDs. There's no blue light coming through at all. I've tested them with my spectrum analyzer, or we use candlelight. And I don't watch TV, so this is easy for me. If you like shows in the evening, this is going to be a lot harder, but maybe some blue blockers would be good. But can I tell you, the very first month I started doing that, my cycle shortened by 3 days. It changed immediately. And that was a real wake-up call for me because, you know, we as cyclical beings, and obviously the benefits to fertility are 3 to 4 months down the track because it's 120 days for egg and sperm, you know, generation. But the fact that my cycle changed in 1 month doing that just absolutely blew my socks off.
But you know, like when you know so much about health and you know everything, you're like, oh, no, what? Yeah, that's normal. Like that's what's supposed to happen. But like us living in the 21st century and everything, you're like, wow.
Yeah. And as a result, I am now going to bed earlier, waking up earlier. I'm now moving more into a natural rhythm. Now, I that was very hard for me when I was younger because I was very stressed and my cortisol suppressed melatonin. So I was a night owl. There's actually no such thing. It's a high cortisol.
I'm so glad you said that. That's what I keep telling everyone. There's no such thing as a night owl. I'm the biggest.
No.
Yep.
It's just a bad cortisol 24-hour rhythm because of stress. And so I sort of got my natural 24-hour rhythm to more of a social rhythm, you know, going to bed at 9, 10 o'clock and then getting up around 7. But now I'm like, who am I? I tried other ways to become a morning person, fail. Once the stress went down, I became more of a permanently exhausted day pigeon. But now that I've like dropped the artificial light at sunset, I'm in bed, I'm going to sound like such a nana, but like 8:30, but I'm awake at like naturally at 5. And after 40 years of never being able to wake up even at 6:30 and feel normal, that is just extraordinary. I know it feels really obvious now that I'm saying it out loud, but for me, it was just one of those habits as a human being. You just have all the lights on, you cook, you clean up, you do something before bed, and then you turn them off. To actually take that one step further and dial the light right down when the sun goes down. Try it for 30 days, and I would love to hear anyone who gives it a go what you find. It'll blow your mind.
I love it. So you've joined the 5 a.m. club without wanting to even join it.
Well, I actually have wanted to join it. I really have. But no amount of setting the alarm. I was just a wreck. I was a wreck. And so I effectively joined it at around 7 a.m. and everything ran kind of 2 hours later. And so it's lovely. It actually feels like what life is supposed to feel like, I believe. And you just can't out ninja your physiology. You can't push your body too far one way and then think you can kind of force it back. It just doesn't work like that. And so I'm glad I've stopped pushing the proverbial uphill.
Yeah.
And actually that one step, I'll never take that back. It's just not worth it anymore.
It's amazing. You've just reset your circadian rhythm to the way it's supposed to be. And I love that. I'm all about the circadian rhythm. I'm all about how our body's supposed to be. It knows when to go to sleep. It knows when to wake up. We don't need these things called alarms. They're doing so much damage to our body. Like if you're working, you put an alarm clock, like don't worry about not drinking water, well, not drinking water, but eating something bad. Worry about that alarm clock. That is an issue. That's one of the issues that may be causing your disease. It's crazy when we think about these things. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing that health hack. It's absolutely fabulous. And I love that. I love the artificial light, turning that off, putting the candle light. And it's interesting. The fact is I've put on the same as you, a red light in my bedroom, and my neighbors must think what's happening there. Like it looks absolutely crazy from the outside. Yeah, from the outside, because it's at the front too. It looks at the street. So I'm like, ooh. But the change is dramatic. That red light and, removing that blue light has made a huge change on myself too. So I can just imagine going that extra step and doing what you're doing. It's just amazing. So yeah, if any of the audience is listening, give yourself a try for 30 days to a minimum.
Yes. Yeah. And one other thing I'll just add to that is a lot of people don't realize we have light receptors through all of our whole skin. And so blue blockers are amazing. Obviously, that's the greatest concentration in the eyes. But let's say you're a diehard The Block fan, for example. I used to love that show. And you can't like record it and watch it the next day. Blue blockers are great, but you also should cover your skin as well as much as you can, which might be a little hard coming into the warmer months, but you want to block as much light touching your body as possible and then go to bed straight after that.
It sounds crazy, but yeah, you're right, because it absorbs it. Your body just absorbs that light and it's like, oh, it's time to wake up. No, it's not time to wake up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I reckon parents will find this useful for kids as well, by the way. Hot tip.
I think so too. There's so many hot tips in this episode. It's just mind blowing. I think they're getting their pen and their pad out and just writing it down old school, not on their phone. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing all of this absolutely amazing information. It's just been such a valuable podcast, all about EMFs, and we even touched base a little bit about mold and exposure and so forth. If people are like, oh my gosh, I love Amie, I love her knowledge, I love her information, where can they find you and where can they get more information about you?
So my website is whatthenaturopathsaid.com. I've got a blog there where I, write stuff about health that you might find interesting, but I am much more active on socials. So if you find me on Instagram, my handle's that naturopath, or on Facebook, you can find me under Amie Skilton Naturopath. Just one little tip though, Amie is spelled A-M-I-E. Love to connect with you there.
Beautiful. And I'll put all the notes in the podcast notes below so people are able to access you and find information from you, and a little bit of some of the talks that you've done. I've put them in there so they can get as much information about their health that they can. But thank you so much for joining us at the Natural Health Podcast. I've loved your knowledge. I've loved your information. Thank you so much, Amie.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You're most welcome. Thank you for joining us at the Natural Health Podcast. And remember, the missing link between failure and success is your health.